A very, very good evening. A warm welcome to Dan Really Likes Wine, presented by Pick and Pay. And welcome to an extremely special edition of the show as we come to you live from the 7th floor of Michael Fridjhon's wine empire. We're in the vintage champagne floor, I believe, surrounded by jacuzzis and great bottles of fabulous wine. But most importantly, alongside Mr. Fridjhon himself. Michael, welcome back.
I'm very glad to have you back here. The pictures from your last visit are on the internet even as we speak.
It was a wonderful evening, not much of which I remember. There's still a smile on your face, and wonderfully so, because last week you were beaming, as were all of our guests today, as were so many people in the wine industry. I felt it was a lovely celebration of South African wine at a time when God knows we needed one.
Absolutely, and it wasn't the way we hoped to time it, but sometimes in the midst of bad news, good news is exactly what you need.
The Old Mutual Trophy Wine Show is celebrating a very important milestone, but also celebrating South African wine at a time when we're watching the industry so closely, because we want it to do well, we want it to flourish, we want it to fight back against the forces that are out to get it, which it feels like at the moment. You've had a week now to think about all the results, to think about all the wine, chat, I'm sure, to some of the judges. A week on, what are your thoughts on this year's edition?
We were happy when the results were finally revealed to me. I thought, actually, if we cheated, we couldn't have produced a better set of results. They are exactly the spread we want to see. It is, in the very nature of the wines, these are stars we like to celebrate. These are varieties that you do want to see on the podium. And so as I look at it again, I just think to myself, this is a great way to celebrate the 20th edition of the show.
In just a moment, we're going to be crossing over to some of our winners. Not all, there were plenty of them, but some of the key winners from the night in question. If you could give us a snapshot from your perspective as chief judge and adjudicator in chief, was there a thread of sorts? Was there a suggestion of style or movement of South African wine based on what you tasted, based on what won?
So, that's a tricky question at one level. We make it very clear, and it's always been the kind of aesthetic that the show has wanted to see rewarded, that we're looking for elegance, we're looking for nuance, we're looking for complexity, and we're looking for finesse. And increasingly, the industry knows that those are the stars of wine that they should be submitting if they think they're going to get a reasonable result. That said, we do absolutely reward fabulous examples of wines that might be bigger, more blockbuster in nature. It's only one glass of fizz, and look at me. But the point is that in a way, that starts to narrow. So the entries generally follow that trend. The judges are directed to look for those stars as far as possible. The judges themselves over the years have come to see that those are the stars that stand the test of time. They are the stars that certainly reach out into the higher price points of the overseas markets. So generally, there isn't that breadth of difference in style that you might expect if you simply started at one end of a supermarket shelf and just kept pulling the corks from the bottles. So there is that refinement, and this lineup certainly reflects it.
We had, at last check, I think over 8,000 people who'd watched the results show from last week, which speaks both to the enormously good-looking and suave nature of the two hosts of said show, but also the genuine interest in this particular space. So before we speak to some of the people who've won the trophies and done particularly well, for people who are maybe still trying to get their head around how do you get the judging just right, if I think back to many visits to R&B Wine X and making my way through, by the 17th stand, my palate was perhaps not as precise as it might have been when I started. These guys are tasting so much wine, your judges, over time. How do you make sure that palate stays as neutral as possible and they stay as neutral as possible?
Well, I heard the story of your golf game earlier today where you had to manage a 12-foot downhill putt. How do you manage a 12-foot downhill putt? It's practice, practice, and practice. No, seriously, there is a finite amount to how much you can taste. The ideal, in fact, requires two things. It requires that the judges themselves obviously spit everything out. Secondly, it does take practice. And I think there is a ceiling. When in the early days of judging Australian capital shows, 200 to 250 wines a day was what you were expected to soldier your way through on. And it does certainly turn you into an ultra long distance marathon taster. But at a point, you're not as fresh, not as good, and not as swift as you might have been in the earlier stages of the day. So a limited number of wines on the tasting bench. No day had more than 80 wines, and that's partly a function, I have to say, of how we try to arrange things and the fact that no class was bigger than that. So at 100 a day, I think even the most skilled tasters start having palate fatigue, and that's got to be avoided. But beyond that, it really is that tasters practice. They learn. All of our judges have been through the Wine Judging Academy or its equivalent, and they have honed those tasting skills, and they are truly impressive. And the very fact that years after years of the sort of lineups we see in which there are top recognized wines or great discoveries that become within a few years recognized wines, when, as we saw even here, there's consecutive vintages from Thokozani, whose wine is elegant and fine. So it's not an obvious blockbuster sticking up in a class of 70 Shirazes. That tells you that these guys are really good at what they do.
And that evidence is reflected in the caliber of our winemakers. And we have a selection of them. Just before I introduce them, I had a number of people send in a similar message, a variation on a theme. Dan, what happens with all of those spittoons? They're going through hundreds of wines a day. Well, very simply, all of that wine gets collected out of the spittoons. It gets bottled, it gets sent to Sydney and sold as Australian premium wine. So that is exactly what happens with it. It's a great rosé, if very slightly saline. Right, let's go and find out what the mood is amongst our winemakers. Very good, I'm sure. As we say, a very good evening and a very warm welcome to Lauren, who joins us from Thokozani. Henk is with us from Paul and Rene. We've also got joining us this evening Juandre, who's with us from Diemersdal. Margaux from Art in Charlottesville is with us, and Natasha joins us from Guys, well, welcome. Thank you very much for being with us, and all still smiling, I can see, which is no surprise. Congratulations again, and well done on the assorted victory. If we can kick off with you, Lauren, because I suspect since we saw you not once and not twice, but 3 times collecting trophies when the announcements were made last week, your phone's probably been going. Chateau Petrus on the line, Romani Conti. Lauren, please can you come and work for us? What's it going to cost? What's the last week been like for you after those 3 trophies?
Evening, Dan. Evening, Michael. Yeah, it still feels very surreal. It's super exciting, and we've got lots going on the farm, and just really proud of what we've done as a team, and the Thokozani first time out with the Cab Franc. So truly grateful. It's an amazing result. Thanks to all the judges and everything. I know you guys' job is not easy, so I appreciate you guys giving me the hats off to my wine. Yeah, and it's the sales of that wine. I mean, we spoke yesterday, and I mean that wine just flew. It is gone. There is nothing left, and that was overnight. So we're still reeling from that, and still enjoying the spotlight that we've managed to attain with the 3 trophies.
I think sadly I was a little bit late to that party in buying my Thokozani, but thankfully we've got a bottle here to taste a little later. And there are 2 really important threads, I think, to this story, Lauren. I'd like you to touch on both of them. One is your own personal story, and then the other is Thokozani. Let's start with the Lauren story. Give us a little bit of the background, how you fell in love with wine, how you moved into the wine space, and how you ended up where you are today.
Yeah, absolutely. Look, wine's always been a big thing for our family. My father used to work for Castle Wine, and we've always had wine in our house, and it's always been around us. And what fascinated me the most was, how cabs from different areas can be so different, how you can make that wine unique to that farm, unique to that area. And that fascinated me, because you can make it your own product. And completely fell in love with it. Went and studied at Elsenburg, did cellar management, viticulture, and via that ended up at Diemersdal as a student. And fortunately enjoyed it here. Lovely cellar, lovely winemakers. Started under Brett Rightford and Francois Roeder. And in 2011, I got asked to stay permanently, and I just never left. I think it's very important to stick with the farm if you find it, if you're happy there and you love making the wine there, you start to learn the grapes, learn the farm, learn what you can and can't do with all the blocks. And that allows for consistency and knowing what you want out of your wines and out of your products. As for Thokozani's story, it's also a very interesting one. David Sonnenberg, who was the owner of Diemersfontein and Diemersfontein Wines, wanted to give back to his staff and to his community. And one of the ways in which they did that was to start Thokozani as a BE brand alongside Diemersfontein. And the shareholders are the staff on the farm. And they recently procured 55% of Diemersfontein Wines Company. So the brand is really owned by our staff. And I mean, that's empowerment like we've never really seen in the wine industry. It's a big brand they own. They work with the wine, with the grapes, with the product, and it just bolsters what we want to do on the farm. I mean, it's long-term empowerment is very important, especially in an industry that isn't really up there for transformation and things like that. And Thokozani and Diemersfontein have made it work, and we make it work here every day. So just as a show to everyone else, it can be done. You can make quality wines coming out of a BE company, and yeah, it's not something to be shied away from. It's something to strive towards.
Two wonderful stories, Michael. You've got here both still a young winemaker who's done terrifically well, and then a story that it goes against the grain somewhat of where we see a lot of South African wine going. I think excitingly so. What are your thoughts, first of all, on Lauren taking your trophy show by storm? She didn't arrive, she kicked the door down. And then Thokozani and what it says about South African wine and possibly an example.
Well, obviously, I'm very, very pleased for Lauren and for Thokozani. The Thokozani venture I've known about right from the beginning before it, and while it was happening, David Sonnenberg was talking to me about it. In the early days of the show, Diemersfontein, in fact, won Best Producer. So they're certainly not strangers on the podium. But Lauren's story and I think it's a really important point, that it also takes time. You need to know the farm, you need to know the vineyards, you can't just waltz in and assume that you're going to coax the very best from your fruit. So I think that part of the story has much wider application. But certainly everything that the Sonnenbergs have done in terms of Thokozani, and the fact that over time, the two brands have, in a sense, merged, because Diemersfontein Wines is now 55% owned by the community for which Thokozani was initially created, tells you that this is really an integrated approach to transformation, and it's a model which I think the industry could and should be looking at.
Lauren, the result of this, as you mentioned, is the wine is almost sold out. We're going to taste the wine a little later on in the show, but just from a very personal level over the course of this last week, I think you've already been promoted based on the phone conversation we had earlier today. But the last week, the phone calls from people, the comments from people in the industry, what's the personal impact on you been of all of this?
No, look, you work on a farm, you do your thing, and for me, I was very much happy to sort of be in the background, put my head down and do the work. But the recognition and the support that I've received from the farm, from people that have just loved the wine and enjoyed it, it's been crazy. It's been immense. And obviously I've got two very proud parents that were really excited. So no, it's just been great. The support I've received and the support that Diemersfontein and Thokozani has received, it's just been fabulous.
There has been a Mrs. Hulsman who's been messaging both me and Michael on the hour, just confirming exactly when this interview is taking place. So congratulations, very proud, man, and rightly so. We're going to come back to you to try a wine I've never tasted, but I am so excited to do so, given all of its awards. We'll do that very shortly. Let's, for now, though, say goodbye to Wellington and head up the road to Robertson and get one of my favourite former rugby players on the show, Mr. Henk van Niekerk. Welcome back to the show.
Hi, Dan. Hi, Michael. Good to be on the show.
I'd like to see how's the Saracen feeling.
Pardon?
You're looking nice and warm on a cold Robertson's night, I'm sure. You've got the Paul Rene board, as do we, and we're going to be tasting it properly just a little later on. But let's go back to last week. We did get to chat to you very, very quickly when we did the announcement. You've had a week for it all to settle in. What are the feelings on getting this award, and what does it mean to you as a winemaker and as a brand?
Dan, it's been fantastic. In a way, still lost for words. We're very excited about it. We're very proud about it. We're very proud to be associated with Michael Fridjhon and the competition. And during the day, the work goes on. It's meant to be pruning and be ripping up, uprooting vines and so on. But this time of the day, when you sit down, you settle in. Then you realize again, in a way, what you've achieved as a team and as a brand. And it's fantastic. Really enjoyed every moment. And the nice part about bubbles, you see a little fire in the background. It is called Robertson now. It started to rain now, but you can drink bubbles almost any time. This is absolutely a bubbly opportunity. Fire and a braai. You don't need to sip on red wine. It's always time for bubbles.
We've discussed your story a few times on the show, but for people who maybe aren't entirely familiar with it, just give us a reminder how this Paul Rene brand came together, and it should be Paul Rene Henk, but it's Paul Rene. Who Paul Rene were, and what's brought you to where you are as a brand today?
Dan, it started. It's my wife Monica's family farm, so we moved here in 2008. 2009 was our first vintage. So after 5 generations, you start here and you quickly learn you can't change this and you can't change that. So the only real way to try and do something is to start something completely new, fresh, with your own ideas. So that's basically where the Paul Rene idea started, to produce good quality Cup Classique was what we wanted to do. So in terms of creating a name, as per tradition, you want to name it after someone. My full name's Hendrik Cornelius Anijane. Hendrik Cornelius van Niekerk. No one was going to drink it. My father-in-law's name is Paul Rene Marais. So we named it after him. So we just called it Paul Rene. And little Paul Rene is also running around here somewhere. His little sister next to me now. So after 2009 was our first vintage. We started off with what is now, our Brut Chardonnay, which started as a Brut. It was always a Blanc de Blanc vintage, but somehow, my wife wanted to have Brut in the front of the label. Wasn't incorrect, but it's not absolutely correct. So a few years later, we branched out to a rosé and now a nectar. But this has always been our flagship, and the backbone was this 100% Chardonnay, always a vintage. So 2012 was our first year release. In the beginning, we had sort of 24 months on the lease, but we've always wanted, as I said last week, to end up with something with a little bit more structure to it. Always aiming for what we thought would be 36 months would be our perfect sweet spot in terms of lease maturation, which proved to be right. So this is our 2017. And now it was degorged in December last year. So 6 months down the line, it's a great taste. It's drinking beautifully, and that's the story in short.
Well, it's a story that proved a smash hit with the judges. 2 questions for you, Michael, around this. First of all, more broadly, based on what you tasted this year, where do we sit with our Cup Classique and those pretenders from France by comparison? And then as we look at this, here's our winner from Robertson. We look at some of the others. There's some guy called Ferrero and has made a bottle or 2, amongst many others in the Robertson area. Is Robertson now effectively our Champagne area? Is it? Does it have the right to call itself the heartland of Cup Classique of bubbles in South Africa?
I think it certainly should set out to do that. And insofar as we're talking about Blanc de Blanc Champagne, very much so. Henk, a question. I presume that there is a certain amount of calcium to the soils where these vineyards are planted.
The connection wasn't that great, but I guess you were talking about the soils.
Yeah.
Calcareous, I believe, is the correct word, not lime or chalk. Calcareous soils. So, yeah, definitely that is an intricate part of the base wine and the base and the building blocks for Blanc de Blanc and Chardonnay in general. So yes, it is. I always say it's you can make wine anywhere, but to make good Chardonnay or base wine in Robertson, it's not easy, but it's not that difficult because they are really, you walk around in the vineyard and you stumble over pieces of limestone rock or calcareous soils type. So it is quite common here, and that definitely is why most people believe that most of the good Blancs come from this region. I certainly do believe, and it's exciting times for Robertson and Cap Classique. We are, keep your eyes open, busy with a sort of a kind of a Cap Classique collective from the Robertson producers. Dan's mentioned Graham Beck. You have the likes of Silverthorn and Jacques Bruwer. There's Paul Rene and a few others. There's Philip Jonker and Lords and many good producers from this region. Let alone other producers who also like to buy grapes from this area. So we're going to start a little something here in Robertson as a Cap Classique collective, and come springtime. So that's definitely something to look out for.
Right, thank you.
I suspect you haven't seen the last of Robertson at the Old Mutual Trophy Wine Show when it comes to bubbles. So those are Henk, some lovely, lovely wine, and we'll come back to Henk to actually taste this one and find out from Michael just why it is so revered. We move away from Robertson. We go back down to Broader Wellington, just the other side of town, and Natasha joins us from Bosman. Natasha, congratulations again. Has it been a week of celebration at the Bosman Family Vineyards?
Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for having me. Yes, definitely. It's, I think, lifted everyone's spirits in the midst of where we are at the moment, in the middle of lockdown. So everyone is very much excited on the farm, and it's definitely one of the vineyard blocks that we cherish a lot. So knowing that it was so well received, it's been a highlight for us.
What about a highlight, Michael, for you guys as the judges? You obviously don't know who's made the wine you're tasting when you judge it, but when you see the results, and we see, as is the case here with Natasha, but across the board with a number of our winning winemakers, so much youth, so much excitement, and the people are making some of our best wine.
I mean, that really is one of the most encouraging features of this year's lineup, is just how youthful the winemaking talent is, and just how precisely it's managed to extract from the fruit, some of it from the opposite of youthful vineyards. I mean, in the case of Natasha's wine, the Optenhorst vineyard is a certified heritage vineyard. She's managed to extract from very old vines the perfect moment in the fruit. It's at 12% alcohol. It really is something that we aspire to. And there it is, coming from youthful winemakers, old vines.
Natasha, it's such a great combination. You've got to make an award-winning wine. You've done so with old vines. You've done so under the guiding hand of someone like Cordelia, who is such a revered winemaker herself. How much does this award, how much does this whole process do for your young career?
It does quite a bit. I think for me as a winemaker and as a young winemaker, it means a lot in knowing what you're capable of. And sometimes just trusting your gut as well. And I think within me being with Bosman and under the leadership of Cordelia and working with a very good vineyard team as well, is getting to know our vineyard blocks. And like Lauren said, it's you kind of learn what you need to do and what not to do. So my first introduction to Optenhorst when I started with the Bosmans in 2015 was as part of the Nederburg auction, and it was showcasing our 2010 Optenhorst Chenin Blanc. And for me as a winemaker, it was quite astounding to see the quality of this old vineyard, and also as a quite matured wine. So that I've always kept in the back of my mind, and knowing the potential of this vineyard block. And going forward for me, it was again respecting the vineyard, respecting the fruit, but also learning a lot from the vineyard, and almost allowing it to me to facilitate the winemaking process and not force my hand too much, but more respect what the vineyard is trying to show, and showcase that through the winemaking process.
Quick point to check with you. Am I right in saying that you're making wine, but at the same time you're still studying at the moment?
I'm just busy with a short course. So I'm busy with the business in wine course. So it's just a short 2 month or basically 1 month exercise. So hopefully I'll be done by Saturday morning.
All right, Saturday night one for celebrating. There's some rather nice old vine Shannon I can recommend you try. We're going to try that Upton Horse to get all these wines lined up, and Michael's making me wait. He's a horrible person, but it is for good reason. Let's move over to Carletsdorp and to our own little corner of port making heaven, except we can't call it that, or the Portuguese get desperately upset. So we'll call it Cape Vintage, and happily so. Margaux, welcome back onto the show. Lovely to have you again. Another triumph for Carletsdorp. And I know this means a lot to you, not just in terms of a bottle that you've made well and the judges have liked, but that it speaks to this extraordinary legacy that you and your family have of making this style of wine in your part of the world.
Yeah, no, thank you very much for having me on the show. No, the port wine is me being the seventh generation of Boplaas family vineyards here in Carletsdorp, and having my dad, Karel, this legend of the port making. I've been standing in his not only shadow, but I've been bringing out my own flavor to the wine as well. It's actually quite an honor. And in 2017, although my 2009 was my first year, I did the port on my own. And I believe that also did very well at the Old Mutual, but the 2017, we're very proud of the 2017 Reserve Port.
I remember when we got to announcing this, there was even more of a sparkle in your eye than usual, because this is a space which you both love, but also feel that we neglect in South Africa. And when you had such a great example to celebrate, you got properly excited.
I did, and for very good reason. And I've known Karel pretty much since he decided to take Boplaas down the direction of genuine port-style wine as opposed to simply fortified wine. And I was involved in those days in the business with actually distributed Boplaas, and I arranged for Karel to go and meet some of the major Portuguese producers, and I know he developed an association, certainly with the Symingtons, following those introductions. So I've watched this happen since I think the 1986 vintage of the Boplaas, which won pretty much every trophy that I'm aware of in the wine industry at the time. It really was a standout wine. And so this is really, in a way, the culmination of a process which is at one level modernized the fortified wine industry. And I think that that's very important. We have a great tradition of fortified wine production in this country, some of which is obviously in port. A lot of it is still in Muscadel, except that the Muscadel producers are really falling by the way, and it's a great sadness. You only have to look at those ancient wines to know what quality we used to make here. So the moment there is something that really kind of flashes on stage, it's an opportunity for me to remind everybody that we should not neglect our fortified wine industry. And if the modern incarnation was led by Boplaas, as it has been, we should also not forget that there were many other versions of it, and that some of those wines are still around, and we should support those producers.
Quick word of comparison. We've spoken already, Cap Classique and Champagne. We often think of the Emiliano Valley and immediately think Burgundy. When we think of our port style, our Cape Vintage versus a Portuguese port, are we trying to pull off something that mirrors them? Have we developed our own style in South Africa? Where does that balance sit?
I think, firstly, that one of the things that Karel certainly led the charge on was the idea of making our port-style wines so that they were in many ways as similar as possible. And that was the first stage. Obviously, what will come from that is a distinctly South African expression of place and of terroir. But he certainly pioneered the much drier style of wine and pioneered the classic Portuguese varieties. Now, those varieties are fairly widely planted amongst the few classical port producers. So no one is now struggling to find a bit of Touriga Nacional, for example. Secondly, it's widely recognized that true port-style wine is not overly sweet. And so those changes have now been made, and we've watched the effect of those changes on wines that are now properly mature. So the next stage, I think, is to see to what extent the expression of place, and we do know that Carletsdorp dominates, but doesn't completely own the local port-style wine scene. We're going to see much greater expression of terroir over the next few years.
Margaux, you've clearly impressed Michael and his judges. What about the rest of the family? What was their response to you getting this particular trophy?
No, we are very close, that family, and we always enjoy a glass of wine or port at any special occasion. And the trophy, I've been announcing the trophy for us for the 2017 was we all had to have a glass of port after the announcement. And also, the CWG Guild also having the 2017 vintage, but specially made a barrel for them themselves. When we are happy with the vintage of the 2017, and I think we will definitely see if in the future drinking this not only this year, the 2017, but also in the next 10, 20, 30 years. But it's one of the, like Michael said, it's one of the classes, the fortified Cape vintages that can last forever. Where can you drink 100-year-old wine and still think it's unbelievable drinking it? And we have the opportunity, not only in South Africa, but the Portuguese, we have tasted some of those old vintage ports from them, 100 years, a bit more than 100 years, port wines, and they last forever. Same with the Calisdorp, or same with the Boplaas ports. We had verticals, and I know Michael was there for some of them. It's unbelievable to see how the ports age and how they don't age. That's one of I think, the missed opportunities people don't understand and don't have. And again, we here in lockdown, and the first lockdown we had so many calls. They found this bottle of port in the back of the cupboards. They are about 20, 30 years old. Can it be drink? And there's a lot of them being drunk during the lockdowns, the first and the second. And I'm sure that there's quite a few in the cupboards getting dusted off for this lockdown as well. And especially with this cold winter days, why wouldn't you want to sit in front of the fireplace having a glass of Cape Vintage or Cape Tawny, drinking those wines? I do love bubbly as well, but really, when it's raining and you're sitting in front of the fireplace, are you really going to drink bubbles, or are you going to drink a glass of Cape Vintage?
Henk van Niekerk, I think you've just been challenged there. We'll come back to Henk in a moment on that. The Cape Vintage, they're going down a treat down in Calitzdorp. Right, one last winemaker to chat to before we taste all of this wine that Michael is still refusing to pour for me. So let's go over to Diemersdal. White winemakers, kings of Sauvignon Blanc, and then they go make all this ridiculously good red wine. Juandre Bruwer, please explain to us what on earth is happening at Diemersdal.
Quite a shock, eh? Yeah, so it's for us a huge honor to get named the most successful producer, and only with a trophy and 2 gold medals. But yeah, like you hear Diemersdal, everybody always think it's Sauvignon Blanc, but I actually overlooked the red wines. And here in Durbanville, we just have the perfect terroir and perfect ground. The weather, the clay soils, red hut and coffee club soils for producing ultimate red wine. And yeah, it's like if you go back into a few years back, I think it was 2018, we won the Riedel Trophy for the Bordeaux Private Collection 2016. So for us again to get announced most successful producer, and with only red wines winning the top tiers, it's just another recognition, or just a nod on the back, just to keep going forward and just to produce what we don't change the recipe or that we have at the moment. But yeah, I think with our farm, with Chase, the family, the Low family, just putting all that money and work into the vineyards to give us in the cellar the perfect grapes to work with. And I think with our clay soils, dryland farming just gives us that quality on our red sides, which delivers much like heavy fruit forward wines that red fruit, black fruit, and like fine tannin structures. We get produced small berries that's just big, flavorful, and yeah, it's a pleasure to work with.
You're obviously excited to get all these trophies. How surprised were you that your Reds did as well as they did?
Well, I thought we were just gonna get like a gold or 1 gold or something, but it was a massive shock to get announced 2 golds, 1 trophy, and a producer. So I think for us, competition-wise, going back 15 years, I think this is the biggest award that we got at the moment, and from Old Mutual for being such strict judging panel, and only to get awarded overall this year 32 golds and 11 trophies, and for us to take 3 of them, it's insane. So yeah, I think this one is going down in the books for a while now.
Durbanville, the new Bordeaux. Who would have thought, Michael Fridjhon?
Well, exactly, except that the famous GS Cabernet from the 60s, the wine that people trade at 20 and 30,000 Rand a bottle, came from Durbanville fruit. It's the place you would go to if you were looking for real Bordeaux-style red wine.
It's another one of the great stories come out of the Old Mutual Trophy Wine Show. Juandre, don't go away because we've got your wine to taste. But I want to go back now to our earlier winemakers as we run through this wine, and head first back to Henk van Niekerk, who's probably sitting tearfully now in a corner of his room after Margaux rubbished his wine and told him he couldn't possibly drink it during winter, but he's a tough rugby man. He'll bounce back. Henk, join us again, and as Michael and I sample this, and before I get Michael's thoughts on it, what for you makes this quite so special?
And you're going to have to repeat that question, please. I was following the whole conversation, particularly with Margaux, but the signal just broke up briefly now. Just repeat the question, please.
No problem. What he's really saying is he was following the conversation until Margaux said you can't drink bubbles in winter, and he went off to have a little cry, but he's back. I wanted you to tell us, please, Henk, what for you makes this quite so special?
Well, I've got to say to Margaux, please send me a bottle of your lovely Boplaas port-styled wine. Love to have a bottle in front of the fire. I will send you a bottle of Renee. You can enjoy that on a sunny day or a winter's day. I've been sitting here, you sit by the fire and you watch the flames go up all night. You sit by the beach and you watch the waves. I've been sitting here and watching bubbles burst. And it's a wonderful way to spend the evening, and it's never the same. It's very interesting, and what makes the question, Dan, was what makes the trophy show special, or the wine special, or this evening special? I missed that again.
The wine, Henk, the wine.
What makes it special? Well, it's the whole process is really special. So for us it's always about trying to produce as good a wine as what we can. So for that, there's no special golden mantra, but I mean, each building block, I think you got to get right. That's our philosophy. So from the vineyard, the grapes, the picking, sorting, the crushing, the base wine really is the cornerstone for the good Blanc de Blanc. So each process, you need to pay attention. You need to focus in each of those steps, up until, you create a good base wine. And then after that, the bottling, second fermentation and the aging and all of that. I believe you got to look at each, break it down into smaller pieces and focus and pay attention to each of those smaller processes. And then basically wait for it to evolve and see where it ends. And it's very exciting, each different process. This certainly, if I may say, obviously it's been our best vintage. So we always try to improve, but you never really know where you're going to end up. But this is a lovely fine mousse that I mentioned earlier, and it's drinking beautifully. I'll be very happy.
You had a query there, Mr. Fridjhon.
I just wanted to know, if you drink a lot of your fizz and then you follow it with a bottle of Margaux's port, are you going to keep away from that Olympic diving board over the dam at the farm? I'm very curious to know.
You know what? I've actually got a plan. I want to extend that pool and make it a little bit longer, and then we can have our own training pool here. But I think perhaps I will go and have that bottle with Margaux on the farm, and she doesn't have to send it here. When I drive through Carlos door, I'd rather have it there.
Maybe safer.
Yes. I hope they don't have a diving board.
Very quickly, Michael, this obviously meant something special to the judges. What are you looking for, and how does this deliver?
And you'll see it in the wine. It's got that ripe lime to lemon, so it's much more limey than lemony, and that's the sign of the Chardonnay. It's got a richness on the middle of the palate. It's got a slight creaminess, so it's not austere. There are moments when your Chardonnay Blanc de Blanc champagnes get two-dimensional, and this has kept that extra richness in the middle. The mousse is absolutely perfect. It's not aggressive. It stays. We've watched the bottle over the course of judging, and it comes back, and we look at it in the afternoon just to see. And that's one of those bubbles that just keeps pumping away there slowly with great finesse. It's really a very beautiful bottle of fizz.
And it's a champion bottle of that. So well done, Henk. You've delivered something fabulous. And cheers, congratulations. Let's move from our Cup Classique and head over to Chenin Blanc and our calling card. And we have the Upton horse. So if I can ask you to pour us a little, Mr. Fridjhon, in our specialist Chenin Blanc glass, which we have for the evening. While we do that, let's head back over to Natasha. Natasha, just tell us a little bit more about this wine, why this vineyard, why these old vines produce something so special, and why that in turn has developed into this award-winning Upton horse.
Yes, so Upton Chenin is made from our Upton vineyard, and it basically means it's a vineyard perched on a hill, and it is a vineyard that was planted in 1952, and Claudia actually saved this vineyard in 2007 when the Bosmans wanted to uproot this, and she said, well, just let me take it into the cellar. That was also the first year that the Bosman cellar was renovated and used after, I think, 50 years. So she took the grapes in, and after 3 months, they were speechless when they saw the quality of this wine. So that's basically where the story started for the Upton Chenin. Like I said, my first introduction to this Upton wine was back in 2015 when I started at Bosman, and I saw the quality of this wine and actually how much essence it still had as a matured wine. And it was also definitely one of the wines throughout my journey with Bosman that we want to showcase the place and give a sense of place and showcase the vineyard and the age of the vineyard. Historically, we've only made this wine in barrel fermentation and with a little bit of bottonage. And in 2017, I slightly started experimenting with different vessels. So I incorporated a concrete tank since 2017. I just wanted to see how this wine will develop in terms of freshness and how to express more of that purity of fruit that you see with the juice when you actually take the grapes in. So 2017 stylistically slightly changed the wine to the result where you see in 2019. So 2019 is still all spontaneous fermentation, and then matured in or fermentation in 50%, about 50% in concrete tank, 50% in older oak. So I would maybe incorporate one new barrel, but when you work with a lower alcohol wine such as this, you want to keep it pure and clean and lean as possible. So I did no new oak with this 2019 vintage, and I definitely had a clear idea of where I wanted this wine to go, knowing the potential of the vineyard block. And it was definitely one of the vintages where we picked a bit earlier compared to historically. And I just supported the wine in that process and made sure that I could show it the best way possible.
And that is exactly what you've done. It's probably, out of all the categories, going to be one watched as closely as any because of the status of Shannon as part of the South African wine package at the moment. This is just this blast of freshness, and it's just lovely.
I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary. I've been I think I've been an enthusiastic and key player in what we like to call the Shannon Renaissance. We have seen that Shannon is not simply being made a calling card for the industry because we have so much of it, or even because now we know we have so much older vineyard. It is because there is a unique style to South African Shannon. It's not like the Loire. This is not like Bruwer. It's not like Jasnier, any of those other appellations. It has an identity of its own. I think that Natasha's point that this year they harvested it slightly earlier has made an extraordinary difference. Here is a wine that is in fact fully ripe at 12% alcohol. It's got viscosity, so the concentration of fruit and juice from those smaller, older berries from a vineyard block that is late 60 years old. And it's still delivering this absolute quality of fruit from a hill slope vineyard. It's everything that you would want if you were going to demarcate in Shannon terms the South African equivalent of a Romani Conti white wine vineyard.
If you'd like to know a little bit more, you can also see I had Corleo on the show around National Show Drink Shannon Day. We talked about this, and I might just get her and Natasha back on next month so I can drink it once again. Right, let's leave the whites. Let's move on to the reds, and let's go back to Durbanville and back to Team Diemersdal. And while Michael again does a wonderful job of decanting, Juandre, the wine, I think we've got the Pinotage, is that right?
We have indeed.
We've got the
Pinotage Reserve 2019, which I am actually pouring into a Brunello glass because the industry hasn't yet wrapped its head around the idea that it should have a varietal specific glass. I've been doing a lot of tasting, and I think that this Brunello glass manages the fruit and the sort of palate weight and the tannin of Pinotage perfectly, but you make the call after you've tasted it.
Which I shall do so, but as I do taste that for the very first time, let's ask Juandre to tell us a bit about it. Give us the story of this particular wine and how you managed to get it just right.
I'm going to take him out of the Diemersdal cellar office glass. So, no, I must say this Pinotage is one. It's actually a joy to work with, and I must say personally, it's one of my favorites of the collection that we have. And yet again, I'm just going to go back to the vineyards, and with the amount of passion and the amount of time that we put into the vineyards straight through the year. This with the ground that we have, the dryland vineyards, it's north-facing vineyard vines, so mainly on clay soil and deep decomposed granite with a bit of that ironstone coffee clip characters. And this wine is made up of a trailer system. It's roughly about say 26, 28 years old, and then the other portion is bush wine. So that's roughly about 46, 47 years old. So what we'll do is we'll get this wine picked by hand, and then we'll ferment it in 1-ton open-top fermenters. So we go quite through them. We do fermentation in them for 4 days, roughly at 25 to 28 Celsius, and we'll do straight through the night. We'll straight through the day. We'll do every 3 hours. We'll do action on it. Depends on which state of fermentation it is. So we'll either be a pump over or punch down or a combined of those two. And with the soils and the vines and the area where we get a lot of fruit forward wines on our red side, Africa as well as on our white, but on our reds, really red fruit, black fruit coming through. And after that, the wine is taken to barrel to go through malolactic fermentation, and after malolactic fermentation, I'll put it in 40% new barrels and the rest older barrels. And just to go back for a overall or trophy win on the Pinotage for 40% new oak on it, just to give you the idea that how fruit forward we are. So we don't want to basically destroy the wine with 100% new oak, because that's Afrikaans simple. So we go for 40% new oak, and that just brings out a full-bodied wine with silky smooth tannins, and it's just like a grapefruit compact, and it's like that juiciness that you get on it. So it's very like Michael said, the viscosity on it, it's really compact with flavors. So yeah, that's why it's just a pleasure working with.
Pinotage hasn't always had the easiest ride from the world's wine writers. Is this an indication that Pinotage is very much back on its feet and dictating a very different story?
I think so, and I think that obviously this is just the kind of Pinotage we would want to be showing the world. I think that Pinotage's bad reputation really does go back a generation now. We're talking about the famous Michael Broadbent remark made, I have to say, very much in passing, when he was here in 1977, and he described it as rusty nails, which I'm not sure that I've ever had a mouthful of rusty nails to know that it was the kind of thing that started to give it a bad name. And I think it's important to mention that a guy like Bas Truter, who believed enough in Pinotage to refine how one vinifies it, brought in oaking as a standard part of the regime. That certainly did help. He set a course for many people in the industry. But what Pinotage, I think, over and above everything else requires is commitment from the producer, because it doesn't make itself. You do really have to manage the fruit. You do have to manage the tannins, and you do have to manage the ripeness levels, because if you don't get those parts right, you get a really tough mouthfeel, and the aromatics in the mouth don't come together. The extraordinary thing about this wine, and I think it really is an achievement, is just how polished and yet how juicy and yet how layered it is. So you're not trying to, in your mind, imagine what it's going to be like 15 or 20 years from now. It's already absolutely coherent. It's a perfect aesthetic statement in terms of fruit, juice, vinosity. It really is doing what good winemaking should be doing.
Juandre, I might be reading too much into this, but I think Michael likes your wine, and that is something shared by the rest of the judges. Well done on a fabulous Pinotage. Let's go. We're going to wrap up with the Cape Vintage, but before we do that, the wine I've been really excited to try. It's the one that swept the awards when it touched down with all of the judges, and that is the Thokozani Cabernet Franc. It was best Cabernet Franc. It was discovery of the show. It was best red wine. Michael Fridjhon's been bathing in the stuff for the last week. Is quite how good it is. Lauren, why? Why is this wine so amazing?
Well, I think, like as I said at the show, the mandate of the wine was pretty easy. I made something that I would love to drink, and I went out with the intention of doing things a bit different and going more fruit driven than the traditional green herbaceous characteristics on a Cab Franc. And I'm as I said before, I'm very passionate about the more complex Bordeaux sort of styled wines, but I know everyone sort of shies away from that if they're not used to that heavy tannic sort of approach to a wine. So I wanted to make something more fruit driven, and to make something that was nice mouthfeel, is ageable but very much drinkable. And fortunately, it worked out really well. The block is, as I said, consistent producer. It was unused on the farm, and could see the potential in it, and went out and made the Cab Franc. And the wine did, and the grapes did the majority of the work. I mean, there was very little intervention during fermentation. The wine was completely stable once it had come out of barrel. And I mean, it only went into third full barrel. So, I mean, it's purely the fruit that's done all the work. And it's been extraordinary. It's done really well, and I'm really happy with the final product.
I always get the sense of like Michelangelo's wife, asking him, have you painted the roof of the church? Yes, I've painted the roof of the church. It's just matter of fact, I've got it done. And yet this is a masterpiece that's been created, and a 100 rand masterpiece.
No, I mean, it is completely extraordinary. And, you know, the point that Lauren made about the risks, I mean, she was very polite. She didn't say this is really sailing between Scylla and Charybdis, because you either get Cab Franc too green. And when it's too green, it's just puckering. I really battle. It's famous in the Loire Valley. The reds of the Loire Valley are made with Cab Franc. If they're the only reds left on a wine list in a restaurant in France, then I just reach for something else, because the odds are that it's just going to send cold shivers up your spine. It gets green, and the green is horrible. When you go to the other side, it gets porty. And that moment is a knife edge, and she's caught it absolutely perfectly. I mean, there is spice, there is fruit, there is a purity of black currant and graphite running through this wine. And it is all exactly on that point that it has to be in order not to fall into either of those two lines of disaster.
I'm not sure there's been a South African grape, albeit on a relatively small scale, that's enjoyed a greater renaissance over the last few years than Cabernet Franc. We've seen an explosion of some really, really good ones. But I don't think even the great Michael Fridjhon was quite expecting this.
No, absolutely not. And the great Michael Fridjhon may or may not have been there, but I wasn't expecting.
Well, Lauren, cheers to you. You've done something brilliant. I love how matter of fact you are about it, and you're very down to earth about an extraordinary achievement. But congratulations and well done. Leaves us just one final wine to try. So let's head back to Carletsdorp, where the internet is still going, connected to a car battery and 3 hamsters on a wheel. And this is a wine. Just before I go to Mark, just some context, because it's not a light or subtle or delicate wine in the sense of many of the others we normally have. There's a lot more to this. It's fortified. It's usually a bit thicker. So how do you find the little nuances and the subtleties that separate a good wine from a very good wine in something like this?
And it is actually remarkable, because whenever I'm called in at the end of a port panel tasting, you know, there's not a lot of controversy. The questions may be around whether something's on the cusp of silver or gold, but you just know with it because there's a coherence. And the thing that I must say about this wine, and I really do like it, is that it is absolutely fresh. That if you didn't know that you were going to be tasting a port-style wine, you might almost imagine that you were drinking a red wine with lots of savory, fresh notes. There's no kind of oiliness to it. There's no spice that is overwhelmed with tiredness. It's super fresh, and on the palate, it's absolutely nuanced. You can actually cut through the layers and get to the heart of the wine. I actually want to, and I'm sure I will, because I drink a lot of wine, as Dan never tires to point out, which means that I have the finest quality blood in the world. I have everything that it takes for a very long life, and I'm going to need it because I want to taste this at its peak.
Well, let's find out from Margaux. You've produced something that Michael is very clearly a fan of, as am I. What's the secret with this style of wine to getting things right?
There's no secret. Like when you have to have lots of kids running around the cellar and making a complete hayok during harvest, and then actually doing a little bit of work as well. But no, the 2017 was a good vintage. It's still dry in the Klein Karoo. We still are getting out of the drought period, and that was perfect for the vineyards. The Portuguese vineyards do very well in a drought scenario. I mean, they use less water. The Touriga Nacional, Tinta Barroca, Touriga Francesa, and Suzal that this port is made out of. Some are bush ones, some are trellises, some comes from the Little Karoo. Even we get a little bit of fruit from Stellenbosch area as well. And a combination of all those scenarios, different terroirs, different cultivars, give a complex fruitiness to this wine. And Michael is correct. There's a lot of fruit in the 2017 vintage. And we only use old oak, and we don't put the ports too long in wood either. We want to keep it as old as possible, and also as short periods of time, so let the fruit shine. And where the Portuguese use a bit more of a rustic fortification spirits, we tend to use more neutral spirits, the 96.4% alcohol, to fortify our port wines, to make sure the fruit shines through, and not the alcohol spirits having also playing a big role in the flavor profile of this Cape vintages. And yes, this vintage will last probably much longer than I do. And I saw Henk with the bubbles, with the little ones as well. I'm sure I can send him a bottle, not only of the 2017, but also of the birth year of his kids, because so fortifies can last. And that is the wonderful thing of all these. Yes, fortifies being drank too young. They never see probably the daylight they should have, and nobody has very old wines in their cellars to drink much later on, because nobody has the patience, and that's what you need, patience.
Right. Well, what I'd like to say, Dan, is that the problem with this isn't patience. It's absolutely delicious. And the problem with delicious is that the idea of deferring gratification becomes harder and harder. I mean, what I'm getting from this is tea leaf and cedar wood and that kind of fresh tobacco aroma. And it's so delicious and so easy to drink that the great difficulty is going to be to keep enough of it for when it reaches the plateau of maturity.
Margaux, you produced a champion wine, as of all of our guests this evening. Thank you for it. Also, great to see Dan really likes wine, and the Old Mutual Trophy Wine Show, bridging friendships between Robertson and Carlottsville as the worlds of bubbles and Cape vintage come together. Guys, to all of you, just a really big thank you. It's been lovely having all of you on the show. People often ask me about Dan really likes wine as a show, what I enjoy most about it. Part of it is the fact that we get to drink lots of fabulous wine, but without doubt, it is sharing stories and meeting terrific people. And tonight we've done exactly that. You guys are beacons of our wine industry. You had a great week last week. You've given us some terrific wine. And at the time, as Michael and I mentioned at the start of the show, when the South African wine industry really is still in a very difficult space, you guys give us reason to smile. So to all of you, to Juandre, to Margaux, to Natasha, to Lauren, and guys, thank you so much for being with us on the show. Thanks for making fabulous wine, and look forward to having all of you back on Dan Really Likes Wine again very soon. Cheers to all of you.
Cheers.
Cheers.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Michael.
And just in wrapping up, a last thought from you, Michael. You've written a number of columns where, as always, you're very honest. You don't gloss over the challenges we face. And sometimes I almost feel like reading your column and then watching Carte Blanche. I'd probably be emigrating to Auckland within minutes. But then there are things you come up with which really make me believe again. And I think to reinforce the point made at the start, when we see young winemakers like this, when we see the quality of the wine that they're making, it really does put a spring in your step.
It does. And you made that point. They're young winemakers, and yet they're making wines that reflect an aesthetic maturity that brings huge promise for what the future holds in store.
So there we go. We finished the show, and it's been a lovely show on a great note. A big thank you to all of our guests who've joined us from across South Africa, and that is also a bonus of tonight. We've seen people from very different parts of the country coming together to showcase the very best of South African wine. A huge thank you to Michael and his team from the Old Mutual Trophy Wine Show, all of the judges, some of whom have almost recovered from the judging process, and a big thank you as well to Old Mutual for supporting South African wine and doing such a terrific job of allowing Michael and his team to celebrate the very best of South African wine. That does it for a Thursday evening and wraps us up. We'll be back with you again live on Monday evening at 5 o'clock. More great wine to celebrate, more great stories to tell, and fingers crossed, wine we can actually buy in South Africa. Enjoy the rest of your evening. Well done again to all the trophy winners and to Michael and his team. A big thank you from Dan Really Likes Wine. Good night.
To join the Pick and Pay Wine Club, simply SMS your smart shopper number to 36775. It's absolutely free, and you'll get for yourself 3 times the smart shopper points on every bottle of wine bought. You'll also get a 20% discount on 10 different wines each month, a 25% discount on a case of wine, and a Magnum, some terrific competitions and invitations to awesome events.